take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm grateful for being given the opportunity to speak on child victims of terrorism. It is, in my opinion, a very hard and difficult topic to speak on, because, as has been stated in the 1924 Declaration for the Rights of the Child, humanity owes to the child the best that it has to give. In many cases, this unfortunately is not the truth. I will discuss related treaties and conventions that apply to child victims, and also in my speech I will speak and give examples of children who are being recruited and become part of militant groups which commit grave human rights violations, which, according to many researchers on this topic, these children should also be considered as victims instead of perpetrators or offenders. I will concentrate on the region of South Asia, as my expertise is mainly focused on South Asia, and in particular the disputed region of Jammu Kashmir, eventually concluding with some recommendations that could or should improve the child victim situation in terrorism and armed conflict over the whole world. It took the United Nations General Assembly almost 30 years to adopt the first Geneva Conventions of 1949 because of the volatile and constantly changing environment. This is because different kind of wars have developed after World War II. It should be taken into account that more than 3 decades have passed. New types of war risen, but with different approaches. It is maybe high time for the United Nations General Assembly to adopt different protocols that provide more protection for humanity, especially for children. Article 1, Sub 2 of the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and adopted in 1977 states that, I quote, "This protocol shall not apply to situations of internal disturbance and tensions, such as riots, isolated and sporadic acts of violence, and other acts of a similar nature, as not being armed conflicts." Unquote. This means that it is only applicable in such non-international armed conflicts which take place in the territory of a state party between its armed forces and dissident armed forces or other organized armed groups which, under responsible command, exercise such control over a part of its territory as to enable them to carry out sustained and concerted military operations and to implement the protocol. What about non-international armed conflict, in which the organized armed group does not have control over a part of a territory, or other internal disturbances and tensions? How will children be protected in those kind of conflicts? Nowadays, most of the terrorist attacks occur during internal disturbances, which have been excluded from Additional Protocol 1 and Additional Protocol 2 of 1977 of the Geneva Conventions. A report has been issued last year on children in armed conflict by the Secretary General, and according to this report, the UN continued to receive reports of recruitment of children, including from some addresses, and allegations of armed groups using young children for checkpoints and even for suicide attacks in South Asia, and in particular Pakistan and Afghanistan. Tehrik-e-Taliban released a video of children, including girls, receiving instructions on how to perpetrate suicide attacks. This group is also responsible for most of the attacks within Pakistan itself. The UN has also received reports that a militant group, Jaish-e-Mohammad, which claimed responsibility for the recent Pulwama attack, which brought India and Pakistan on the edge of a war, and Hizbul Mujahideen were recruiting children to fight against security forces in the Indian Administered part of Jammu Kashmir. Lashkar-e-Taiba recruited and indoctrinated a 15-year-old boy from Jammu and Kashmir, who eventually was killed during an encounter. I have just mentioned a couple of cases of terrorist organizations in Pakistan regarding the indoctrination and use of vulnerable children for the terrorist organization's ideology. The radicalization process and indoctrination of these extremist militant groups, who allegedly have the support of the Pakistani military establishment to foment terrorism in Indian Administered Jammu Kashmir, starts with an unhindered treatment they receive from the very same establishment. You're able to roam unencumbered in Pakistan, while the international community's desire is to designate them as terrorists and put a ban on them, many times unsuccessful. Hafiz Saeed, Lashkar-e-Taiba leader, holds rallies and writes columns for a newspaper promoting jihad, especially amongst children who are vulnerable because of their age, lack of experience and education, no future perspective and other issues. The same goes for Jaish-e-Muhammad chief Masood Azhar, who still is able to recruit youth to commit terrorist attacks. As I have mentioned before, the Pulwama terrorist attack, in which more than 40 paramilitary forces were killed. The recent Pulwama attack has only flickered tensions between Pakistan and India. Children have been used for this by these terrorist groups. The children instead are the ones who should be provided with an opportunity to live life, instead of becoming victims of terrorism, having the knowledge of it, and die with not having experienced their own youth. Children should not become part of a radicalization process that suits the terrorist organizations for their own ideology, while exploiting the child's vulnerability of committing suicide. That is actually what youngsters do. Committing suicide when the indoctrination process starts waging a holy war against the so-called enemies, without even actually committing the real deed. These children are most of the times considered as offenders instead of protecting them. The reason for a difficult perspective for this is that child soldiers shift from innocent childhood to dark maturity by committing international crimes. Still, they should not be treated like offenders with free will. To shed more light on the issue, through the process of military training, radicalization, and recruitment, a collective mind of the terrorist group is overriding the individual ones, and subsequently, child soldiers are transformed within a mob and become de-individualized. De-individualization, in this case, can be defined as a state of lessened concern over social evaluation and reduced restraints against prohibited acts. Generally, regardless of created unity, conformity, and loyalty through the training process, fear, as the most common characteristic of this phase, turns child soldiers into obedient followers who don't have control over their own fate. Hence, in the first place, they should be treated as victims of terrorism, and in the second place, as juvenile offenders with lower criminal responsibility.